Deterrence AI, the leading blog in proactive security.
All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on something that, let's be honest, is always kind of lurking in the background of our lives, right? The psychology of security.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
I mean, you think about it or not, it's there. And you, our awesome listeners, you sent in a ton of really interesting stuff on this. It's not just about, like, the best locks or the latest gadgets.
Right.
It gets into the why, the human element. Why do we make the security choices that we do?
Absolutely. And what really stood out to me in all this material you sent was this idea of not just reacting to threats, after the fact,
Right.
but really trying to, understand how to prevent them in the first place, how to discourage those unwanted actions by getting inside the heads of the potential, bad actors, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, the folks who might be looking for those vulnerabilities. So we're talking about understanding motivations, perceptions, really like getting ahead of the curve.
Exactly. It's using psychology as a lens, almost like a predictive tool.
Okay, so instead of just bolting down the hatches, we're trying to figure out why someone might even want to try and pry them open in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And the material you shared really spans the gamut. I mean, we've got stuff from like these historical giants, right? Cesare Beccaria, Jeremy Bentham.
Oh, yeah.
These guys were thinking about crime and punishment centuries ago.
Way ahead of their time.
And then we've got all the way up to the present day with things like rational choice theory, the impact of our daily routines on security, and a whole smorgasbord of these psychological principles, like how we perceive risk.
Yeah.
Which, let's be honest, I think we all know we could probably use some help with, right?
We all have our blind spots.
We do. And then there's these weird little mental shortcuts our brains take, the cognitive biases, right?
Oh, yeah, those fascinating little quirks.
The power of social norms, like how much we just want to fit in, how we can get desensitized to security stuff, just tune it out.
We get habituated to it. Yeah, it becomes the background noise.
It does. and even this idea that sometimes, being too strict with security, having too many barriers can actually backfire and make people rebel.
Yeah, you create this psychological reactance. People push back against what they perceive as overly controlling.
Yeah. So it's a full spectrum look at how our minds interact with this whole concept of security.
Definitely.
And what we want to do today is pull out the most useful, most actionable pieces for you, our listeners, so you can make smarter choices.
Exactly. It's about empowerment through understanding.
Yeah, to protect what matters, whether it's your home, your business, your digital life. This feels kind of like a massive puzzle, though. Where do we even begin to piece this together?
Well, I think going back to those early thinkers is a good place to start.
Okay.
Beccaria, for instance. He was really challenging the status quo back in the 18th century. He didn't believe that punishment should just be about revenge.
Okay.
He argued that the purpose of a justice system should be to prevent future crime.
To deter it.
Exactly. To deter it. And he outlined these three core elements of deterrence: severity, certainty, and celerity.
Okay, so severity is how tough the punishment is.
Right. But what's interesting is he believed that just making punishment super harsh wasn't always the most effective way.
Really?
Yeah. He actually emphasized the certainty of being caught and punished, and the speed, or what he called celerity, of that punishment.
So it's almost like he's saying, look, it's better to know you'll face a consistent consequence and you'll face it quickly.
Yes.
Than to have this vague fear of something truly terrible, but that might never actually happen.
Absolutely. He was really highlighting this reliable and timely application of justice as a more effective deterrent.
That's fascinating, especially when you think about how justice systems often work and all don't work today.
Right.
So a guaranteed moderate punishment that happens quickly.
Yeah.
More effective, in his view, than this rare but terrifying one that could take years to actually happen.
Precisely. And then you have Jeremy Bentham, who comes along a bit later. He had this greatest good for the greatest number perspective, this utilitarian lens.
Okay.
And he was really focused on this idea that individuals are constantly doing this cost-benefit analysis, weighing the potential pleasure or gain against the potential pain of punishment.
Oh, so even if it's a split-second decision.
Even if it's subconscious, yeah.
In the back of our minds, we're sort of weighing the odds.
Yeah, we're calculating the risks and rewards.
Okay.
And Bentham's famous for this concept of the panopticon.
Yeah.
This prison design where the inmates could never be sure if they were being watched.
Right.
And this really highlights his focus on the perception of certainty, even the possibility of surveillance, just that feeling of being watched could be a powerful deterrent.
So even back then, that feeling of being watched was already key to sort of deterring unwanted behavior.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So Beccari and Bentham, they really laid the groundwork for what we now call classical deterrence theory.
Yes.
What are some of the big assumptions behind that way of thinking?
Well, the classical theory assumes that people are primarily rational actors.
Okay.
They have free will, they're making these conscious choices based on this cost-benefit analysis, and they're mostly responding to those formal legal sanctions.
So like fines, imprisonment.
Yeah, the official punishments.
The stuff that's in the law books.
Exactly. But of course, we know that in reality, people aren't always these perfectly rational beings making these calculated decisions.
Right. Life's a little messier than that.
Exactly. And that's where the modern theories come in, like rational choice theory.
Okay. How does that, update the classical view?
Well, rational choice theory acknowledges that rationality is bounded. It's influenced by a lot more than just the law. Things like informal sanctions, so social disapproval, shame, our own moral beliefs, the fact that we often have incomplete or just plain wrong information, and then, crucially, those cognitive biases we talked about.
So it's not just about what the law says. It's the risk of disappointing your family, feeling guilty, things like that.
Right. Those internal pressures can be huge deterrents, too.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
And then there's routine activities theory, which shifts the focus away from the offender's motivations and looks more at the situation itself.
Okay.
It says that crime is more likely to happen when you have three things converging in time and space: someone motivated to commit a crime, a suitable target, and the absence of a capable guardian.
Oh, I see. So that's like, I don't know, someone looking to steal a bike. That's your motivated offender.
Right.
They see an expensive bike that's not locked up. That's your suitable target.
Yes.
And there's no one around to see them. No cameras, no witnesses. That's your absence of a capable guardian.
Exactly. And a lot of security efforts are focused on manipulating those last two elements, making targets less suitable and boosting the presence or perception of capable guardians.
Okay, so we've laid out some of these big kind of overarching theories.
Right.
But your sources really zeroed in on the psychology at play here. So let's dive into that.
Okay.
Let's start with this whole idea of risk perception, because it sounds like that's really central to all of this.
It is. And what's fascinating is that our behavior isn't driven by the actual statistical probability of something bad happening, but by our perceived risk, our own gut feeling about how likely it is and how bad it would be if it did happen.
Okay, so it's not the hard numbers. It's how we feel about those numbers.
Right. It's subjective. It's our own personal interpretation of the risk.
That explains why, some people will do these things that seem so risky to everyone else.
Yes.
And some of us are worrying about things that are statistically, pretty unlikely.
Exactly. And this perception is shaped by so many things: our personality, how risk-averse we are, our past experiences. But the environment plays a big role, too. How security measures are presented.
Okay.
So think about visible security measures. Cameras, warning signs, good lighting. These can dramatically increase someone's perceived risk of getting caught.
It's like putting that "this area is monitored" sticker on your window.
Yes. Even if your camera system isn't that sophisticated, just the sticker itself makes people think twice.
Right.
And then clear, believable communication about the risks and the consequences. If people don't understand the threats, it's hard for them to factor that into their decisions.
Makes sense.
And our personal experiences, or even just hearing about what happened to other people, can really shift our perceptions. If your friend gets their email hacked, suddenly you're way more careful about your own online security.
Oh, for sure. Those stories stick with you way more than just reading, some dry statistics.
Right. And that brings us to those cognitive biases.
Okay, yeah. These fascinating and sometimes frustrating little quirks of our thinking.
They're like mental shortcuts.
Yeah.
And they can really mess with how we perceive risk and make decisions about security.
Okay, so let's unpack some of these. Let's start with the availability heuristic. What's that all about?
So the availability heuristic is this tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events that are really vivid or recent just because they're easy to recall.
Okay.
So you see a news story about a big cyber attack. Even if statistically that type of attack is rare, the media coverage makes it feel much more common and threatening.
So the dramatic event, the one that's easy to picture,
Yeah.
overshadows the more mundane risks, even if those are more likely.
Exactly. So you might panic about that big data breach you saw on the news, but neglect your own basic password hygiene,
Right.
which is more likely to affect you in the long run.
Okay, that's a good example. What about optimism bias?
Oh, optimism bias. That's the classic "it won't happen to me" mentality.
Yeah.
And this is a big one when it comes to security. It makes us underestimate our own personal risk.
Uh-huh.
So we skip those precautions like strong passwords or multi-factor authentication, even though those are the things that would actually protect us.
Oh, I've definitely been guilty of that, especially with online stuff. It's like, oh, I'm not that interesting. Why would anyone target me?
It's a common thought. And then there's confirmation bias. This is our tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe and ignore stuff that contradicts it.
Yeah.
So if someone's convinced that security is a waste of time, they're going to focus on those news stories or those anecdotes that reinforce that belief,
Right.
and they'll dismiss any expert advice that says otherwise.
So we kind of create these echo chambers in our own minds?
Exactly. We filter out information that challenges our pre-existing beliefs.
Okay, that's a powerful one. Then there's loss aversion. You mentioned this earlier.
Yes, loss aversion. This is key to understanding how we make decisions. It's this idea that the pain of losing something is much stronger than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
Okay.
So if you frame a security message in terms of what someone could lose, it's way more effective.
So instead of saying keep your account secure, you say don't risk losing access to your account.
Exactly. That fear of loss is a stronger motivator. Think about those emails that say, your account will be locked if you don't act now. They play on that.
Oh, yeah. Those definitely get my attention.
And then there's anchoring bias.
Okay.
This is our tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we get, even if it's not the most accurate.
Okay.
So let's say you're shopping for a home security system, and the first one you see is super cheap.
Right.
That price becomes the anchor in your mind, and suddenly a slightly more expensive system, even if it's way better, seems outrageously pricey.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely experienced that. That first price you see really sticks with you.
It sets the benchmark.
It does. And lastly, there's that normalcy bias.
Normalcy bias.
Mhm.
This is our tendency to underestimate the likelihood of something really bad happening, especially if it's never happened to us before.
Okay.
It's that it can't happen here mentality.
Right.
And it can lead us to be really unprepared for things like natural disasters or major cyber attacks.
So if we haven't experienced it, it's hard to really imagine it happening.
Exactly. We downplay the risk because it feels outside our realm of experience.
Okay. So it sounds like understanding these biases, like really deeply understanding them,
Yes.
is critical for anyone who's trying to like create good security measures or communicate about risk in a way that actually gets through.
Absolutely. And the good news is, once you're aware of these biases, you can start to develop strategies to mitigate them.
Okay. So how do we do that?
Well, education and awareness is key. Just knowing about these biases can help people recognize when they might be influencing their judgment. Presenting risks with clear data and statistics can provide a more objective perspective.
Right.
Framing messages in a way that leverages those biases, like using loss aversion, can be really effective. And then just providing people with simple decision support tools like checklists for online safety. Those can help us make more rational choices.
Okay, so we're not just slaves to these biases. We can learn to work with them, or at least work around them.
Exactly. It's about being mindful of how our minds work and using that knowledge to our advantage.
Now let's circle back to those core elements of deterrence we talked about earlier. Certainty, severity, and celerity.
Right.
We talked about how Behaviour really emphasized that certainty piece. What does modern research tell us about the relative importance of these three?
Research overwhelmingly supports Beccaria's intuition. The perceived certainty of being caught is the most powerful deterrent.
Okay.
That's why those visible security measures, like cameras and alarms, tend to be so effective. Even if the actual chance of getting caught is low, just the perception that it's high can make a big difference.
So it's less about having the most high-tech, super secret security system and more about making it obvious that someone's going to see you if you try something.
Exactly. It's that visibility, that feeling of being watched. And there are other things you can do to boost that perceived certainty. Random security checks, enforcing rules consistently, public awareness campaigns. It all sends the message that there's a high likelihood of getting caught.
So what about severity then? I mean, you said that Beccaria thought it was less important than certainty. Where does that stand today?
Severity does play a role, but it's more complex. there's a point of diminishing returns with harsh punishments.
Okay.
What one person finds severe, another might not even care about,
Right.
especially if they think they won't get caught. Plus, people have different risk tolerances. And then there's the concept of opportunity cost. If someone's facing a potential consequence, they're weighing that against what else they could be doing.
So a huge punishment that feels unlikely might not be as effective as a smaller one that feels almost guaranteed.
Exactly. The certainty trumps the severity in a lot of cases.
Okay, so the takeaway here is make the risk of getting caught feel real, rather than just threatening these big, scary consequences that might never happen. And then lastly, there's celerity, this idea of swiftness, how quickly a consequence follows an action.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that it's often overlooked. Why is that speed so important?
Well, the longer the gap between the action and the consequence, the weaker the connection becomes in people's minds. It reduces that perceived certainty because it doesn't feel as immediate, as directly tied to the behavior.
It gives you time to, rationalize what you did, convince yourself you got away with it.
Exactly. Swift consequences reinforce that link. Think about immediate feedback. Like a website telling you your password is weak right when you try to use it.
Right.
That's effective. So to increase celerity, you can streamline legal processes, give immediate warnings for minor violations, use technology for quick detection and response.
Okay, so perceived certainty is king. Swiftness is its, trusty sidekick.
Yeah, good analogy.
And severity is more about finding the right balance than just, constantly escalating the punishments.
Exactly. It's not just about being harsh. It's about being smart and strategic.
Okay, that gives us a much clearer framework for, how to design effective security measures. Let's bring this down to earth a little bit. Let's start with our homes.
Okay.
If someone wants to improve their home security using these principles, where should they start?
Well, as we said, that layered security approach is key, creating multiple hurdles that make it seem more difficult and riskier to break in. So start with your perimeter. Simple things like fences and gates, they create a physical and a visual barrier.
Okay.
Security lighting is crucial. Motion-activated lights can startle someone approaching, make them feel exposed.
Right.
Ambient lighting eliminates hiding spots. Even your landscaping plays a role. Thorny bushes under windows, keeping hedges trimmed so there's no cover. It's all about making your home less appealing as a target.
So even how you do your yard can send a message about your security awareness. I like that. It's not all about, spending a ton of money on gadgets.
Exactly. It's about being thoughtful. Now let's talk about those more visible measures. Security cameras.
Okay, yeah, those are a big one.
Visible cameras are all about leveraging perceived certainty. Just seeing a camera can deter someone. Now, for them to be effective, you want decent resolution, at least 2K, ideally 4K, so you can capture clear details. Good night vision is important too. Make sure they cover key entry points, vulnerable areas, and don't underestimate signage. Just having a sign that says, "This property is under surveillance," can amplify that deterrent effect.
It's a visual reminder that you're being watched.
Exactly.
Okay, what about those video doorbells that have become so popular?
Video doorbells are great because they combine a lot of benefits. Visual deterrent, they give you that sense of control. You can see who's there without opening the door.
Right.
And that two-way audio, so you can talk to someone remotely. That can be enough to scare off someone who's up to no good.
Right.
And the motion detection, that increases that perceived risk of being noticed even before they ring the bell.
Oh, I see. It's like that extra layer of, I know you're there. Okay, so now let's talk about, the entry points themselves. Doors, windows. What are some good ways to secure those?
For doors, solid core construction, reinforced frames. Smart locks, they offer convenience, but they can also add to that perception of security by making it seem more difficult to get in.
Okay.
For windows, good locks are a must. Adding security film to the glass makes it harder to break, which increases the time and effort and therefore the risk for someone trying to get in. Window sensors, those trigger an alarm if the window's opened or broken. That adds another layer of certainty.
Okay. So what about security measures inside the house?
So interior motion detectors can detect unauthorized movement, increase that risk of being discovered. And a good alarm system, especially one that's monitored, that dramatically boosts the certainty of a quick response if there's a break-in.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about cybersecurity. It often feels like a whole different world.
It does, but the psychology is surprisingly similar. Think about passwords. Using strong, unique passwords for every account makes it harder for someone to get in. It increases the perceived risk for an attacker.
Yeah.
Multi-factor authentication, MFA, that's huge. It adds another layer of verification, making it much harder to access your accounts.
Right.
And using authenticator apps is generally more secure than relying on SMS codes.
Yeah, MFA can feel like a hassle sometimes, but it does make me feel more secure knowing it's harder for someone to get in.
Absolutely. It's like adding an extra lock to your digital door.
Yeah, exactly.
Phishing awareness training is crucial. Those attacks exploit our biases, like the availability heuristic and optimism bias. Teaching people to spot those red flags, that's how you counter those vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And even just keeping your software up to date, that's a basic way to reduce vulnerabilities and signal that you're not an easy target.
So it's all about making yourself a harder target, whether it's your house or your online accounts.
Exactly. Increasing the perceived risk and effort for anyone trying to do something they shouldn't.
So thinking about both physical and digital security, what are some of the common mistakes people make when they're trying to use these principles?
One big one is relying too heavily on technology alone. You can have all the gadgets, but if people aren't using them properly or if they're still engaging in risky behaviors, it's not going to be enough.
Right. It's like having a fancy alarm system but leaving your front door wide open.
Exactly. Security is about human behavior as much as it is about technology.
Makes sense. What else?
Lack of clear communication. People need to understand why security measures are in place, how to use them properly. If they don't, they'll find workarounds or just ignore them altogether.
Okay.
Inconsistent habits, sometimes locking your doors, sometimes not. That weakens the whole deterrent effect.
It sends mixed messages.
It does. And then there's the mistake of making security so restrictive, so cumbersome, that people just try to bypass it for convenience.
Right. Like if a system is too annoying to use, people are just going to find ways around it.
Exactly. You create that reactance we talked about.
Okay, so it's about finding that balance between security and usability.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up here, what are some of the biggest things you're taking away from this deep dive?
For me, it's that reminder that security is so much more than just locks and alarms and firewalls. It's about understanding human behavior, how our minds work, the biases we're all susceptible to,
Yeah.
and realizing that certainty is a more powerful deterrent than severity. That's a big one.
It is.
And that swift action reinforces the importance of security measures.
Yeah, it's not enough to just have a rule. You have to enforce it consistently and quickly.
Absolutely. And for you, our listener, as you think about your own security, remember that you can shape your environment to make it less appealing to those who might want to take advantage.
Okay.
Think about how visible your security measures are, how you communicate about risk, and be aware of your own biases when making decisions.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It shifts the focus from just reacting to threats to actually trying to prevent them by understanding how people think.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought, and this has really been kind of bouncing around in my head. Now that we get how important perceived risk is to, someone who might be thinking about doing something wrong, it makes me wonder about all the little things we do every day that might unintentionally make us look vulnerable.
That's an interesting point.
And on the flip side, how even small changes, small tweaks, could really boost our security without having to, go overboard.
It's about being mindful and strategic.
Yeah, what's one little security tweak you can make today? Knowing what we know now, just something small but smart. I think that's something for all of us to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a fascinating one.